ever lived in an HOA and thought your neighborhood took parking rules too seriously? Get ready. What happened in my community turned a simple guest parking confusion into a neighborhood-wide showdown that exposed secrets, rewrote policies, and pushed the HOA to its limits. Before we start, tell me which country you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. The whole mess started on a quiet Friday evening. I had lived in this HOA for years, long enough to know that rules could change depending on who was offended that week. Still, nothing could have prepared me for how far things would go when my neighbor's guest parked in what a certain group of residents called the wrong spot. My neighbor, Clara, had family visiting. Her nephew, a college kid traveling through for the weekend, parked his car in an unmarked visitor space near her townhouse. It wasn't anyone's assigned space, it wasn't labeled, it was open pavement like every other guest spot. But some neighbors insisted those spots were informally reserved, part of a parking arrangement drawn years ago but never documented anywhere. That night, everything seemed normal. The next morning, it exploded. Clara walked outside to find a bright orange violation notice taped across her nephew's windshield. The paper claimed the car was parked outside designated boundaries, which made no sense because the spot didn't have boundaries at all. The HOA president, a woman who loved rules more than peace, claimed the guest had disrupted the historic flow of traffic. No one understood what that meant, but it didn't matter. The HOA had issued a notice, and soon the self-appointed parking enforcers were gossiping around the block. The nephew shrugged the warning off, but the HOA didn't. The next day brought a new letter, then another, then a fine. The situation escalated until the HOA released something none of us had ever seen before, a parking map. It was printed on beige office paper and looked like someone had designed it in the early 2000s. Spaces were colored in red, green, yellow, and blue, but none of us could figure out what the colors meant. Each spot had numbers that didn't match any addresses. One spot listed as 7B didn't even exist. Another claimed the road behind our homes was actually a cul-de-sac, even though it was a straight street. The chaos boiled over one night when two neighbors got into a shouting match over a visitor who had parked in a yellow zone. According to the map, yellow zones were for temporary standing, but the HOA refused to define what temporary meant. 5 minutes? An hour? Overnight? No one knew. The HOA simply said, "Use good judgment," which was their way of saying, "We'll decide later." The next morning, we woke up to find new signs staked into the ground. They were printed on cheap vinyl and said authorized parking only, even in areas that never required authorization. It felt like the more we complained, the more rules the HOA created. I knew things had gone too far when I saw a tow truck circling the neighborhood like a shark. The HOA had hired it to patrol daily. The driver had a clipboard with the parking map printed on it. He looked just as confused as the rest of us. He asked residents which spots belonged to which homes, and no one could answer because no two people agreed. Clara reached her breaking point after her nephew's car was nearly towed while he was standing right next to it. The tow driver said the HOA told him the car was in a restricted guest allocation zone. Clara tried to argue, but the tow driver admitted he didn't even know what that meant. That was the moment Clara decided to fight back. She started by knocking on every door in the neighborhood. She collected photos of the arbitrary fines, copies of inconsistent warnings, and screenshots of the HOA portal where different board members had posted contradictory rules. Then she requested official HOA documents, the original bylaws, meeting minutes, amendments, parking resolutions, and maps. The HOA ignored her first 3 requests, but by law, they had to respond eventually. When they did, it only made things worse for them. There was no parking map, no amendments, no record of any meeting that discussed parking assignments. The HOA had invented the entire thing. Word spread fast. Homeowners were furious. A group formed to challenge the board and force a vote. Residents who never cared about HOA politics before were suddenly knocking on doors with clipboards. Others brought chairs outside and held impromptu meetings right on the sidewalk. Eventually, the members gathered enough signatures to demand a full board election. The HOA president tried every tactic to stop the vote. She claimed the signatures were invalid. She said the petition violated procedures. She even tried to call an emergency meeting at 6 a.m., hoping no one would come. But people came, more people than she expected. When the vote finally happened, the community packed the clubhouse. The president tried one last speech about order and tradition, but it didn't work. The board was voted out almost unanimously. The new board's first act was simple. They shredded the parking map. They restored visitor parking to a first-come, first-served system. They refunded the fines, they canceled towing contracts, and they rewrote the parking policy in clear, simple language that everyone could understand. By the end of that week, the neighborhood felt like it could breathe again. The tension faded, people started waving to each other again, visitors stopped worrying about where to park, and Clara's nephew, who had accidentally sparked the entire rebellion, drove away relieved that he would never see another orange violation notice again. In the end, the HOA learned a hard truth. Sometimes the smallest disputes reveal the biggest problems. And in our case, a single guest parking in a so-called wrong spot exposed years of mismanagement and forced a much-needed reset. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories, and tell me which country you're watching from.